Captain Kim Hyun leaned back in his command chair aboard the UES Thunder, watching the stars drift past through the main view screen. It was supposed to be a routine patrol mission along the Outer Rim territories. The coffee had gone cold in his cup hours ago, and most of his bridge crew looked ready for their next sleep cycle. That peaceful moment shattered when Communications Officer Park Mingi suddenly straightened at her console. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface as strange symbols cascaded down her screen. The bridge's ambient lighting shifted to amber as automated systems detected an incoming transmission. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual," Minji announced, her voice cutting through the bridge's quiet hum. "It's definitely not human in origin. The signal is incredibly weak and breaking apart, but there's something about the frequency patterns that suggests extreme distress." Heian set down his coffee cup and moved to stand behind her station. The transmission crackled with static, but beneath the interference, he could hear something that made his blood run cold. Even through the alien language and deteriorating signal quality, the emotion was unmistakable. Pure terror. "Can you clean it up?" he asked, placing a hand on the back of her chair. Minji's fingers danced across her controls, running the signal through every filter and enhancement protocol in their database. Slowly, painfully, fragments of meaning began to emerge. The translation matrix struggled with the alien syntax, but key words started appearing on her secondary screen. "Captain, it's coming from the Vega system," she said, her face pale in the console's blue glow. "The transmission is from something called the Luminar. They're describing some kind of attack on their research colony. Multiple ships, heavy weapons, civilian casualties mounting." The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of life support systems. Every crew member knew about the Luminar from their xenobiology briefings. They were one of the galaxy's most peaceful species, completely pacifist by nature. Their entire civilization was built around scientific research and the pursuit of knowledge. The idea of them being attacked was like hearing about someone kicking a sleeping kitten. Sir Minji continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're specifically asking for help from anyone who can hear this. The signal is on an open emergency frequency, broadcasting to the entire sector." Heian felt his jaw clench. He knew exactly what the Galactic Council's official position would be on this situation. Humanity was still considered the new kid on the block in galactic politics. Their membership in the Council was recent and conditional. The official policy was clear. Human military forces should avoid interfering in conflicts between established alien species. Too much risk of diplomatic incidents. But as he listened to another fragment of the desperate transmission break through the static, something deep in his chest began to burn. These weren't warriors calling for backup in some territorial dispute. These were scientists and researchers, probably families with children, being slaughtered while the galaxy's civilized species followed proper diplomatic channels and filed the appropriate paperwork. "Navigation. Plot a course for the Vega system," Heian ordered, his voice carrying the authority that had gotten him through 3 different colonial conflicts. "Engineering. Prep all 4 ships for immediate hyperspace jump. Weapons. I want full combat readiness in 15 minutes. His bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew what this meant. They were about to ignore direct orders from Earth Command and potentially start a diplomatic crisis that could get them all court-martialed. But not one of them hesitated to carry out his orders. The UES Thunder vibrated with barely contained energy as it tore through hyperspace, leading 3 other human warships toward what could be their destruction in the ship's intelligence center. Li Soying hunched over her workstation, surrounded by holographic displays showing fragmented alien communications. Empty coffee cups and energy bar wrappers littered her desk as she worked through her 3rd straight hour of signal analysis. "Got something," she muttered, highlighting a section of decoded text that made her stomach drop. The words, "Dominion," "Collective" appeared in stark red letters across her main screen. Soyang had studied every major galactic power during her training at the Intelligence Academy on Mars. The Dominion wasn't just another territorial empire looking to expand their borders. They were something far worse. They were slavers who specifically targeted peaceful species, stripping them of their technology and forcing their populations into brutal labor camps. She pulled up her database files on the Dominion and felt her blood pressure spike. Their standard operating procedure was horrifyingly efficient. They would arrive at a peaceful world with overwhelming force, kill anyone who resisted, and drag the survivors away in cargo holds. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones spent decades in mining operations or weapons factories until their bodies gave out. Captain Huan to Intelligence Center, came the voice through her comm system. Soyang here, sir. I've got bad news about our destination. Put it on the main bridge display. She transferred her findings to the bridge and watched through the security camera as Captain Huan's expression darkened. The Dominion had been expanding aggressively for the past 50 years, swallowing up smaller civilizations, while the major galactic powers looked the other way. Their technology was stolen from dozens of conquered species, making them unpredictable and dangerous. Meanwhile, 3 decks down in the Marine Bay, Lieutenant Commander Choi Jinwoo was having his own preparations to worry about. He stood before 43 of the toughest fighters humanity had produced, each one a veteran of conflicts that would give galactic peacekeepers nightmares. These weren't regular soldiers. They were Marines who had learned to fight in the tunnels beneath Seoul during the Food Wars, who had survived the brutal close-quarters combat of the Europa mining rebellion. Listen up, Jinwoo announced, his voice carrying easily over the hum of weapon systems being checked and armor being sealed. Intelligence says we're dealing with the Dominion Collective. For those of you who slept through Xenology class, these are the bastards who make a living out of enslaving entire civilizations. The Marines' reactions ranged from grim nods to savage grins. These were soldiers who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments in human space because regular combat wasn't challenging enough for them. The good news, Jinwoo continued, is that Dominion forces have never faced humans in close combat. Their tactics are built around intimidating peaceful species who surrender after the first show of force. They're about to learn why the rest of the galaxy calls us Deathworlders. Private Han Miso, barely 22, but already carrying scars from the Titan Station incident, raised her hand. Sir, what's our rules of engagement? Jinwoo's smile was nothing pleasant. Any Dominion soldier who's actively enslaving civilians doesn't get to surrender. Any Dominion soldier who's harming non-combatants doesn't get to retreat. We're not here to take prisoners or follow galactic warfare conventions. We're here to remind the universe that some lines should never be crossed. The Marines began their final equipment checks with the methodical precision of predators preparing for a hunt. In just a few hours, the Dominion Collective was about to discover why humans had earned their fearsome reputation across the galaxy. The transition from hyperspace always made Captain Huan's teeth ache. But this time the sensation was forgotten the moment his eyes focused on the main view screen. What he saw there would haunt his dreams for years to come. The Luminor Research Station hung in space like a dying star, its crystalline structures cracked and bleeding atmosphere into the void. Fires burned in sections that should have been impossible to ignite, creating an eerie light show against the backdrop of distant stars. But that wasn't the worst part. 12 massive Dominion warships moved through the debris, field with the casual efficiency of wolves picking through a slaughter. Their dark hulls bristled with weapon systems that were currently being used for target practice on tiny evacuation pods. Each pod contained maybe 6 or 7 Luminor civilians, families who had been trying to escape when the attack began. Sweet Mother of Earth, whispered Tactical Officer Yoon Ji-hoon from his station. They're not even pretending this is a military operation. They're just murdering everyone. Hyun watched in sick fascination as a Dominion destroyer casually vaporized. 3 more escape pods with a single blast from its main cannon. The Luminor inside those pods had probably been researchers, maybe teachers or engineers, who had never held a weapon in their lives. Now, they were just expanding clouds of superheated gas. "Captain," called out Communications Officer Park Minji, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I'm picking up Dominion communications. They're not even using encryption. They single quotes, They're laughing about it, sir. Making jokes about how easy this is." The bridge fell silent, except for the steady beep of sensor readings. Hyun felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest as he counted the enemy ships again. 12 Dominion vessels, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in his small fleet. The U.S. Thunder and her 3 sister ships were designed for patrol work and pirate hunting, not taking on a full Dominion battle group. Any sane military commander would have immediately jumped back to hyperspace and called for reinforcements. The smart play would be to report the massacre to Galactic Command and let the proper authorities handle it through diplomatic channels. That's what the rulebook said. That's what his training at the academy had taught him. But Kim Hyun hadn't survived 3 colonial wars by following rulebooks. "All ships, this is Thunder Actual," he announced over the fleet communication channel. "Combat formation Delta 7. Full weapon systems online. We're going in hard and fast." "Sir?" Yoon Ji-hoon said carefully. "The tactical computer is showing we're outnumbered 3-1. Their combined firepower is almost 4 times our maximum output. The probability of mission success is—" "I don't want to hear probability calculations while those monsters are murdering civilians." Hyun cut him off. "Besides, those computers don't account for one very important factor." "What's that, sir?" Hyun felt a grim smile spread across his face as he watched his crew prepare for what should have been a suicide mission. Every single person on his bridge was working faster and more efficiently than they ever had during training exercises. There was no fear in their movements, only a cold, focused anger that he recognized from his days fighting in the tunnels of New Shanghai. "Those Dominion ships have never fought humans before," he said. "They're used to facing civilized species who follow galactic warfare conventions. Species that surrender when the odds are against them. Species that value their own lives more than protecting strangers." The Thunder's weapon systems came online with a low thrumming sound that vibrated through the deck plates. Around him, his bridge crew moved with the deadly precision of predators who had finally found worthy prey. Today, the galaxy gets reminded why we're called Deathworlders. The first indication that something had gone terribly wrong for the Dominion came when their sensor operator started screaming, "Contact! 4 ships dropping out of hyperspace at bearing 27 Mark 4. The alien's voice cracked with panic as readings flooded his display. "They're moving at impossible speeds. Combat. Approach vector." Dominion Fleet Commander Vexstar barely had time to turn toward his tactical display before the human ships were already among his formation. In 30 years of conquest, he had never seen anything move like these vessels. They didn't follow standard galactic combat doctrine. They didn't maintain safe distances or execute careful flanking maneuvers. They came straight at his ships. Like guided missiles, the EU's Thunder led the charge, her hull glowing red-hot from the friction of atmospheric entry as she dove toward the largest Dominion cruiser. Captain Hoon had pushed his engines beyond safety limits, using a combat approach that would have horrified any Academy instructor. At the last possible second, the Thunder pulled up in a maneuver that should have torn her apart, raking the cruiser's underbelly with plasma fire that carved through armor plating like a hot knife through butter. But it was Captain Oh Da-yoon aboard the UES Storm who truly showed the Dominion what human warfare looked like. Her ship came screaming between 2 enemy cruisers in a combat role that made her entire crew hold their breath. The Storm's rotating motion allowed every weapon system to bear on both targets simultaneously. creating a devastating spiral of destruction that no galactic military had ever developed because it was considered too dangerous to attempt. Impossible, Vextar snarled, watching his tactical display in disbelief. No ship that size should be able to execute those maneuvers without breaking apart. His weapons officer was frantically trying to get target locks on the human vessels, but their movement patterns defied every combat algorithm in the Dominion database. These ships fought like living creatures, twisting and diving through space with an organic fluidity that made precise targeting nearly impossible. The Storm completed her role just as her weapon systems reached full charge. Twin plasma cannons, missile batteries, and point defense systems all fired at once, creating a sphere of destruction that engulfed both enemy cruisers. The portside cruiser's main reactor went critical, erupting in a ball of superheated gas that painted the nearby asteroid field in brilliant orange light. The starboard cruiser fared even worse. The Storm's concentrated fire punched through its armor and detonated its ammunition storage, breaking the massive vessel in half. Hundreds of Dominion soldiers who had been laughing about massacring civilians just minutes before were now floating in the vacuum of space. "These aren't normal galactic forces," Vextar's tactical officer reported, his voice trembling. "Their attack patterns suggest combat experience against opponents of equal or superior technology. They're fighting like they expect to lose ships and don't care." That was when Vextar understood what he was facing. These weren't peacekeeping forces or territorial defense fleets. These were warriors from a species that had learned to fight against impossible odds and win through sheer, bloody-minded determination. The UES Fury and UES Lightning flanked his formation from opposite sides, their captains coordinating attacks with a precision that spoke of countless battles fought together. They moved like a pack of predators, each ship covering the others while they reloaded or maneuvered for better firing positions. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the other fleet commanders are requesting immediate withdrawal. We've lost 4 ships in less than 3 minutes." Vextar stared at his tactical display, watching red icons representing his vessels wink out, one by one. In 3 decades of conquest, he had never lost a single engagement. His forces had crushed dozens of peaceful civilizations without taking significant casualties. Now he was learning why these particular aliens were whispered about in fearful tones throughout the galaxy. The surviving Luminor scientists huddled in the emergency shelters of their burning research station, their crystalline bodies pulsing with colors that reflected their terror and amazement. Through the reinforced viewing ports, they watched something that challenged everything they understood about galactic warfare. The human ship, US Thunder, had taken a direct hit from a Dominion plasma cannon that should have vaporized it completely. Instead, the vessel emerged from the explosion trailing atmosphere and debris, but still firing its weapons with deadly accuracy. Huge sections of its hull were missing, exposing internal corridors to the vacuum of space, yet somehow the ship kept fighting. Elder researcher Lightweaver pressed his angular face against the viewing port, his body shifting to pale blue with confusion. How are they still operational? Their structural integrity should have failed catastrophically. His assistant, a younger Luminar named Crystal Song, pulsed with rapid orange patterns of disbelief. Their entire aft section is gone, yet their weapon systems are still online. It's as if they built their ships expecting to lose half the vessel and continue fighting. That was exactly what human engineers had done. Every human warship was designed with the hard-learned lessons of 3 centuries of desperate colonial conflicts. Redundant systems, isolated compartments, and backup power cores were built into every section. When other species built elegant vessels optimized for efficiency, humans built ugly, overbuilt monsters that could take punishment and keep dealing it out. The Thunder shuddered as another enemy blast tore through her port side, but Captain Hyan's voice remained steady over the communication channels. "Damage control teams to sections 7 through 12. reroute power from non-essential systems. We're not done here yet. Meanwhile, Master Sergeant Yang Junho was about to give the Dominion forces a lesson in exactly why humans were feared throughout the galaxy. His boarding pod had punched through the hull of the Dominion flagship like a bullet through paper. The moment the cutting charges blew the entry port, Junho led his 12 Marines into the enemy ship with the kind of aggressive tactics that had won humanity its fearsome reputation. The first group of Dominion soldiers they encountered had been prepared for standard galactic boarding protocols. They expected the humans to establish a defensive position and slowly advance through the ship using proper military doctrine. Instead, they found themselves facing warriors who moved like controlled violence given form. Junho rolled under the first enemy's plasma blast and came up inside his guard, his combat knife finding the weak point in the alien's armor before the creature could react. Behind him, Corporal Kim Seona vaulted over a barrier that should have provided cover, landing behind 3 surprised Dominion troops who had never faced an opponent willing to turn their own defensive positions into traps. "They're not following any standard assault patterns," screamed a Dominion officer into his communicator. "They're fighting like they've lost their minds." But that wasn't madness the Marines were displaying. It was 300 years of learning to fight against superior numbers and technology on the most dangerous planet in known space. Every tactic they used had been tested in the underground wars of Earth, refined in the brutal conflicts of the outer colonies, and perfected through necessity against enemies who showed no mercy. The Dominion tactical computers had been programmed to counter every known galactic military doctrine. They could predict flanking maneuvers, calculate optimal defensive positions, and coordinate complex battle strategies. But they had never encountered opponents who treated warfare like a contact sport, who viewed impossible odds as just another Tuesday, and who considered their own survival secondary to completing the mission. Within minutes, Yang Junho's small force had fought their way to the flagship's bridge, leaving a trail of shocked and defeated enemies behind them. The Dominion fleet commander found himself staring at a human warrior, whose armor was scorched and dented, but whose eyes burned with the kind of determination that had conquered a death world. "Surrender your vessel," Junho said simply, "or we take it the hard way." The retreat of the Dominion fleet was unlike anything the surviving Luminar had ever witnessed. These were the same ruthless conquerors who had methodically destroyed their peaceful research station just hours before. Yet, now they fled through hyperspace, like frightened animals. 3 of their massive warships had been completely destroyed, and 4 others limped away, trailing atmosphere and debris. Their hulls cracked open like broken eggs. But victory had come at a terrible cost that weighed heavily on every human heart. Captain Odayun stood on what remained of the UES Storm's bridge, her uniform torn and blood-stained, staring through a massive hole in the forward bulkhead where the main view screen used to be. Emergency force fields flickered weakly, barely containing the ship's atmosphere. Half her bridge crew was gone, their stations reduced to twisted metal and sparking electronics. "Damage report," she called out, though she could already see the devastation with her own eyes. "Main engines are offline, weapons systems at 12%, life support failing on decks 4 through 7, reported her surviving tactical officer, Lieutenant Park Sunho, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Captain, we've lost 13 crew members. Confirmed casualties." The number hit Dayun like a physical blow. 13 brave souls who had volunteered for a mission to save complete strangers. 13 families back on Earth who would receive the visit that every military family dreaded. 13 empty chairs at tables, where laughter would be forever diminished. Among the dead was Chief Petty Officer Li Guan, who had stayed at his post in engineering when the plasma conduits overloaded, manually rerouting power to keep the weapon systems online, even as the section filled with toxic fumes. Corporal Han Minsu had thrown himself on a damaged power coupling to prevent an explosion that would have killed half the Marines in the boarding party. Navigation Officer Yoon Sora had died at her station when a Dominion torpedo punched through the bridge armor, but not before she had plotted the attack vector that allowed the storm to cripple 2 enemy cruisers. Captain Hyun, to all ships, came the voice over the communication system. Begin rescue operations immediately. I want every life pod recovered, every survivor located. The Luminor paid enough for our delay in getting here. As the human ships moved carefully through the debris field, something extraordinary began to happen. The Luminor research station, which had seemed completely dead just minutes before, began to show signs of life. Emergency airlocks cycled open, and figures in crystalline environmental suits emerged into the vacuum of space. The Luminor survivors were unlike anything the humans had expected. Their bodies were composed of living crystal that could shift and change color based on their emotional states. As they floated free of their damaged station, their forms began to pulse with patterns of light that seemed almost musical in their complexity. Elder researcher, Lightweaver, the senior scientist who had coordinated the evacuation efforts, approached the human vessels with movements that seemed to dance through the zero-gravity environment. His body had shifted to a deep gold color shot through with silver patterns that the human universal translators identified as profound gratitude mixed with reverence. We have monitored your communications, Lightweaver transmitted to Captain Hayan. We understand that 13 of your people gave their lives for strangers they had never met. In 4,000 years of Luminor civilization, we have never encountered such selfless sacrifice. More Luminor emerged from hidden shelters throughout the station's wreckage. There were perhaps 200 survivors out of the original 3,000 researchers and their families. Each one began to pulse with the same golden patterns of gratitude, creating a light show that turned the debris field into something beautiful and sacred. Your species calls this bravery, continued Lightweaver, but we have another word for it. In our language, we call it soulfire, the burning light that appears when a being values the lives of others more than their own existence. As the rescue operations continued through the long hours that followed, the humans worked alongside the Luminar survivors to save every possible life from the wreckage. They didn't speak much about the 13 who had died. That wasn't the human way. Instead, they honored their fallen comrades by ensuring that their sacrifice had meaning, that every Luminar life saved justified the price that had been paid. 3 days after the battle, the human fleet remained in orbit around the damaged Luminor research station, their ships serving as temporary life support and communication hubs for the survivors. Captain Hyun stood in the Thunder's main conference room, facing a holographic projection of Elder Christasong, whose crystalline form pulsed with deep blues and purples that the translation matrix identified as profound sorrow. Mixed with gratitude, Captain Hyun, Crystal Song began, his voice carrying harmonics that made the human's chest vibrate with emotion. What you and your people have done defies everything we understand about galactic civilization. In 3 centuries of Dominion expansion, they have attacked 47 peaceful worlds. 47 times, distress calls were sent across the galaxy, and 47 times, those calls went unanswered. The weight of that statement settled over the conference room like a physical presence. Intelligence Officer Lee Soyang, who had been quietly recording the conversation, felt her hands clench into fists. 47 worlds. Millions, maybe billions of innocent beings enslaved or killed. While the galaxy's major powers calculated the political costs of intervention, the Galactic Council's official position, Crystal Song continued, is that intervention in Dominion conflicts represents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Most species have economic treaties with the Dominion. They purchase the technologies and resources extracted from conquered worlds, while maintaining the comfortable fiction that they are not responsible for how those resources were obtained. Captain Hyun felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. Are you telling me that the galaxy's major powers are essentially customers of a slave empire? Not customers, Captain, partners. Crystal Song's form shifted to angry reds and oranges. The Hegemony Council trades rare metals mined by Luminor prisoners. The Celestial Federation's advanced computers run on processing cores built by enslaved Zephyrian engineers. The very ships that patrol galactic trade routes are powered by energy crystals grown in Dominion labor camps. The revelation hit the human officers like a physical blow. They had assumed they were fighting against a rogue military force, not challenging an economic system that apparently funded half the galaxy's infrastructure. Dr. Nam Yona, who had been treating injured Luminar survivors for the past 3 days, leaned forward in her chair. How many species are currently enslaved by the Dominion? Our intelligence network identified at least 12 before our station was attacked, Crystal Song replied. But we have something that might help prevent more worlds from joining that list. The holographic display shifted to show a complex star map covered with shipping routes, fleet positions, and military installations. It was intelligence data that would have taken human forces years to gather through conventional means. For 8 years, our research station has been monitoring Dominion communications and tracking their fleet movements, Crystal Song explained. We know their supply lines, their staging areas, and most importantly, their next targets. Within the next 6 months, they plan to attack the Gentle Current homeworld and the Harmony Collective's outer colonies. Lieutenant Commander Choi Jinwoo studied the tactical data with the eyes of a professional soldier. This is incredible intelligence. With this information, we could position our forces to intercept them before they reach their targets. Or better yet, added Li Soyang, we could hit their supply lines and staging areas, cut off their ability to project force across such vast distances. Captain Haon remained silent for several long moments, studying the star map and considering the implications. What they were discussing wasn't just a military campaign, it was a declaration of war against an economic system that apparently involved most of the galaxy's major powers. Elder Crystal Song, I need to ask you something directly, Hyun finally said. If we use this intelligence to start attacking Dominion operations across multiple systems, we're going to make enemies of every government that profits from their slave labor. Earth Command might order us to stand down. The Galactic Council will probably try to have us arrested as war criminals. Are you prepared for that level of political fallout? Crystal Song's form shifted back to the deep gold patterns that indicated absolute certainty. Captain, 47 worlds have fallen while the galaxy's leaders counted their profits. If it takes war criminals to stop genocide, then perhaps it is time for the galaxy to have war criminals. 2 weeks after the battle at the Luminar Research Station, Captain Haon stood on the observation deck of the UES Thunder, watching the last of the Luminar survivors board the transport vessels that would carry them to safety. The rescued scientists had insisted on staying until every piece of valuable research data could be recovered from their shattered station, working alongside human engineers to salvage decades of work from the wreckage. What Haon didn't know was that their story was already spreading across the galaxy at the speed of light. The Luminar possessed something unique among galactic civilizations, a quantum communication network called Crystal Song that allowed instantaneous information sharing across vast distances. Every Luminar colony, every research outpost, every diplomatic mission was connected through crystalline resonance patterns that carried not just data, but emotions and memories. Within hours of the battle's end, every Luminar in the galaxy knew exactly what had happened. They felt the terror of the attack, the despair of watching their people die, and the impossible hope that came when human ships dropped out of hyperspace against overwhelming odds. More importantly, they shared the emotional truth of what they had witnessed: beings from another world who valued Luminar lives more than their own safety. But the Crystal Song network didn't stop with the Luminar. The quantum resonance patterns were monitored by dozens of other species who used the network for their own communications. Within days, the story had reached every corner of civilized space, growing and changing with each retelling. On the aquatic world of Tidal Deep, The flowing current species spoke in hushed tones about the surface dwellers who fought like the legendary storm spirits of their ancient myths. The peaceful harmonic collective composed songs about the warriors who came from the death world called Earth, their melodies carrying across their entire planet through subsonic vibrations. Even species that had never heard of humans before, suddenly, found themselves learning about the insane bipeds, who treated galactic warfare like a contact sport. Captain Hyun was reviewing damage reports in his ready room when Communications Officer Park Minji's voice crackled over the intercom with barely controlled excitement. "Captain, you need to see this. We're receiving priority communications from Earth Command, but also from 17 different species I've never heard of. They're all asking for the same thing." Hyun made his way to the bridge to find his communications console displaying a queue of incoming messages that stretched across multiple screens. The first transmission was from Admiral Chen at Earth's Fleet Command, her weathered face appearing on the main view screen with an expression that mixed pride with concern. "Captain Haeon, I'm not sure whether to court-martial you or recommend you for the highest honors Earth can bestow," she began. "Your unauthorized engagement with Dominion forces has created the biggest diplomatic incident in human history. It's also apparently made us the most requested military force in the galaxy." The Admiral's image was replaced by a series of alien faces, each one representing a different species that had somehow learned about the battle at the Luminar station. The gentle current, with their flowing tentacles and bioluminescent communication patterns. The crystal builders, whose geometric forms pulsed with mathematical precision. The song weavers, whose ethereal voices could supposedly predict the future through harmonic analysis. Each message was essentially the same. "We have received word of your people's courage. We are threatened by forces beyond our ability to resist. We request protection." 17 different species, Captain Admiral Chen continued, some of whom we didn't even know existed until 3 days ago. "The Galactic Council is in complete chaos. Half of them are demanding that we be expelled for violating non-interference protocols. The other half are quietly asking if we'd be willing to protect their worlds too." Lieutenant Commander Choi Jinwoo leaned over to Tactical Officer Yoon Ji-hoon with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. "Remember when our biggest worry was pirates in the Outer Rim? The transformation was already beginning. Human shipyards across Earth's solar system had started receiving massive construction orders for military vessels. The colonial marines were expanding their recruitment quotas by 300%. Defense contractors who had been struggling to find buyers for their weapon systems were suddenly working around the clock to meet demand. But more than the military buildup, something fundamental had changed in how humanity saw itself in the galaxy. They were no longer the newcomers trying to find their place among ancient civilizations. They had become the species that others turned to when the civilized galaxy's polite diplomacy failed to stop genocide, as the Thunder prepared to jump to hyperspace, carrying intelligence data that would reshape galactic politics. Captain Haeon looked out at the stars and realized that there was no going back. Whether they had asked for it or not, humanity had just become the galaxy's guardians. The age of human protection had begun,